Next pattern is what I call a cow killer ant. I don't know if you have ever heard that term or not, but as a kid growing up in Alabama, we run across these great big, I guess what most people call velvet ants that really aren't ants, they're wasps. They're flightless wasps, and as kids we used to call these things cow killers because we were convinced that if they ever bit a cow, the cow would die. So that's where the name comes from on this thing. It's tied a lot like the disco ant, but it's a good bit bigger. And I tie these with either an orange, a yellow, or a red abdomen and a black head. This is what it looks like in the finished form. And to tie this fly, I simply use a standard number 12 dry fly hook. You can tie them bigger or you can tie them smaller if you want to. So we'll just pull out a size 12 hook here. Just a standard dry fly hook. I don't know whether you've noticed on this tape or not, but my scissors are magnetized on the end, so it makes getting these hooks out a little bit easier. So I've got my hook. I'm just going to take this fly out of the vise, get it out of the way, pop this hook in there. I'm going to use two different size discs to do this fly. Remember this little box here? These discs are cut at 1/16 of an inch difference in sizes. This would be a 1/4 inch, this would be 5/16, this would be 3/8, etc., all the way up to 1/2 inch. So to tie this fly, I'm going to make the abdomen out of this size disc here, and the head will be one size smaller. So there are my two little foam discs, again cut out of the 1/16 inch foam with these little circle cutters that you've seen before. Just cut your discs and you're ready to go. Just attach the thread to the shank of the hook. And just as we did in that disco ant, I'm going to bring the thread all the way back to the rear where the bend of the hook starts and trim it. Now I apologize for my fingers getting in the way on some of these flies, but when you're working with foam, you've really got to get down there and hold it in position. If you don't, it's going to shift on you and it's very difficult to tie in. So when I put this foam in, I want to kind of bend it around the shank of the hook and then just tie in the forward portion of that foam with a few tight wraps and continue to wrap it. You can see this is the same procedure that we used on the disco ant. There's nothing different here. Just difference in size of the discs, difference in color. So we've got the rear tied in. Make sure that that flares out nicely. You can see that forms a nice little abdomen on this ant. Just like the disco ant, then bring your thread up to the eye of the hook and then backward a bit. About 1/8 of an inch or so, maybe a little bit more would be enough on this particular fly. I'm going to take this black disc and I'm going to put that right over the eye of the hook, extending just about back to where the thread stopped when I was wrapping it rearward. I've got to reach in now, kind of orient that disc where I want it, and again pinch it over the shank of the hook. This is where you have to learn to tie left-handed. Bring that thread around. Once you get it in position, you can kind of reach up there, pinch that foam, and tie in the rest of the material. See, that's going to extend well out over the eye of the hook. Don't worry about that. Your tippet will fit in there fine and you can tie it down. Okay, we'll just run that thread backwards. Try to cover up that back. Make sure those discs are tied in nice and tightly. Now you can put plenty of pressure on this foam. It's not going to break. It's not going to cut. But sometimes you got to be a little careful with it. Again, I'm going to use peacock herl for the body on this fly. I love peacock herl. I'm going to cut out 3 or 4 fibers of that. Again, trim the ends. And remember, I always tie the ends in, not the butt. You don't want to tie this butt section in, tie the tips in, because when you wrap it, then it's going to fuzz out the way you want it and it's going to look real nice. So we'll tie this in right here at the back of the fly. Wrap the thread all the way to where the front disc was tied in. Then I'm simply going to wrap this hackle, or wrap this herl rather, around the hook shank all the way up to the base of the front disc. And I'm going to tie it off right there. Just bring your thread over, give it a couple of wraps, and reach around and trim that peacock herl out of the way. Again, when I tie with peacock herl, remember I always bring the thread back through it to reinforce it. In this case, all the way to the rear of this, where the disc is, then back into the middle. Stop your thread just about in the middle of the fly. The legs on this are not hackle, it's just black crystal flash, and you pull out 6 or 8 fibers, maybe a little bit more. I found that you can overdo it with crystal flash. You can get too much of it in there, and sometimes it seems to spook fish a bit. So pull out a bunch of crystal flash fibers, 6 or 8, cut them. And let me point something out to you. If you use a lot of crystal flash, this is the easiest way to store the stuff. These are just little clear plastic cylinders. Soda straws work just as well. Put a Loctite on them. You can stick them through that cylinder and it keeps it from flopping around all over the place, and you can cut it to exactly the length you want every time. It's a nice thing to remember. Now I've got these little fibers of crystal flash here. I'm just going to lay those over the hook shank. Just going to bring them into position here. Make a wrap over. Tighten that down. I'm going to have to reach around and grab these now with my thumb and forefinger. Tighten that wrap down and then make a figure 8 wrap behind the wings, or the legs as the case may be, on the opposite side of the fly. Then pull these fibers up and out of the way. Make 3 or 4 figure 8 wraps. And the legs will lock in position very nicely. Occasionally you get one that just kind of flips out of the way. Just trim it out. It's not going to matter. Fish can't count. And we're through. And again, just take your whip finisher. Finish this fly off by just whip finishing right through that peacock herl. It's not going to mess it up at all. Don't be scared to wrap that thread through the peacock herl. It won't make a bit of difference. And we trim this off. Just clip the thread at the bottom. And of course our legs have to be evened up, so I'll grab these, trim those at that point there, and then sort of eyeball these down here so they come out to about the same length. Again, it's not critical that they be exactly the same, but it's kind of nice if you want a neat looking fly. That's the cow killer ant. I remember the first time I fished this was on the Madison River out in Montana. A little side channel coming off the Madison, and there was a couple of nice fish rising in there. I say a couple, there were probably a dozen or more. I hadn't tried this fly, and I put it on, and I think I took 6 out of that pot of fish. So this fly has worked consistently and probably will continue to work very, very nicely everywhere.